Dinner was just about to start when we heard the knock. It was late and we weren't expecting anyone, so we exchanged nervous glances. My father was hesitant but went to answer the door. Standing there was a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by shadows. He held a calm, almost eerie smile as he introduced himself as an old friend of the family. None of us recognized him, but he spoke with such certainty that my father, reluctantly, invited him inside. He joined us at the table, where his presence seemed to cast a heavy silence over the room. The man never introduced himself by name, only mentioning that he had known my grandparents well. As we ate, he barely touched his food, his gaze focused intensely on each of us in turn. His eyes were sharp and calculating, as if he were examining something far beyond the surface. His stare settled on my younger sister, and she shrank back, uncomfortable. The man spoke of things he shouldn't have known, family secrets, long-buried grievances, details of our lives that no stranger should know. His voice was low, each word dripping with an unsettling familiarity. My mother whispered to my father, suggesting we ask him to leave, but something in the man's gaze made him hesitate. There was a darkness behind his smile, a hunger that twisted my stomach. As the evening wore on, I noticed his hands, pale, almost gray, with thin scars running across his fingers and up his wrists. When I asked about them, he only smirked, saying he'd earned them a long time ago. The way he said it sent a chill through me, as if those scars had a story soaked in blood and secrets. And then, in a sudden flash of movement, he pulled out a knife, pressing it against the edge of the table with an unsettling calm. My mother gasped as the man ran his fingers along the blade, his expression cold and unfeeling. My father, finally snapping out of his hesitation, demanded that the man leave immediately. But the man simply chuckled, his voice low and mocking. "Leave? You invited me here," he said, his tone dripping with dark amusement. His eyes shifted to each of us, lingering with a menacing intensity. Before we could react, he slammed his hand down, the knife digging into the table. "The sins of the past must be paid," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with malice. My father, desperate, tried to pull him away, but the man twisted, using the knife to slash across my father's arm, drawing blood. The wound was shallow but enough to send my father reeling back, clutching his arm in pain. A metallic scent filled the air, sharp and overwhelming. The man leaned over the table, pressing a blood-stained handprint onto a blank piece of paper he had pulled from his coat. "A blood pact," he murmured, his voice reverent as if performing a sacred ritual. His smile grew wider, and his eyes glittered with a dangerous hunger. We all watched in horror as he folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his coat pocket. "The debt is marked," he said, looking directly at my mother, "and every debt must be repaid in kind." His words were cryptic, but the way he held our gaze made it clear that he meant harm. My father, bleeding and pale, urged us to get to the car, to escape. But as we moved toward the door, the man stepped in front of it, blocking our path with an eerie calm, his knife glinting in the dim light. "You don't get to leave yet," he whispered. Panic took over as we realized we were trapped. My father, weak from the blood loss, tried to confront the man again, but the stranger merely laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. He reached into his coat, pulling out the blood-stained paper and holding it up for all to see. "This," he said, his voice filled with a terrible finality, "is the price your family must pay." The man leaned in close, his face now fully illuminated. His features were gaunt, almost corpse-like, and his eyes were empty, devoid of any warmth or humanity. He recounted a twisted story of betrayal, explaining that our ancestors had made a pact, one that required a bloodline sacrifice. They had avoided it for generations, but now, he was here to collect. My heart pounded as he revealed a small vial, filled with a dark, viscous liquid. He poured it onto the table, letting it pool in front of us, then placed the knife down with chilling precision. "One must be given, or all will suffer," he whispered, his voice almost affectionate as he gestured toward my sister. Desperate, I lunged at him, grabbing the knife. But he was faster, twisting my arm painfully until I dropped it, his strength unnatural and overpowering. With a final, hollow smile, he forced the blade into my hand, positioning it toward my father, who stood pale and trembling. The man whispered in my ear, "The blood must spill to seal the pact." In the final moments, as the room spun and I felt the cold steel in my hand, I realized the truth: the man wasn't human, and he wasn't leaving without claiming his due. The knife moved, my vision blurred, and then everything went black. When I woke up, the man was gone, leaving only the blood-stained pact on the table. The words, scrawled in red, read, "Paid in full." My family was gone, and I was left alone with the knowledge that this debt, this curse, would never truly be repaid.